Welcome to Wealth of Words.
Yes,
It's where we unpack some seriously thought-provoking books.
absolutely.
I'm Richard,
And I'm Isabella.
and we are thrilled you're joining us.
We're ready to dive deep into today's literary treasure.
Yeah, before we crack open the pages, though,
Yeah,
make sure you hit that follow button and tell us what you think.
we love to hear from you.
Yeah, your feedback really helps shape Wealth of Words
Right.
and keeps those insightful conversations going.
Absolutely.
Now today,
Yes.
we're tackling a classic that might surprise you with its modern-day relevance.
You might be surprised.
It's The Art of War.
By Sun Tzu.
Yes, you heard right, the ancient military strategist.
Ancient wisdom from modern times.
I know I was skeptical too.
I can imagine.
When I first heard about applying ancient warfare tactics to modern life.
Right.
But trust me,
It's mind-blowing.
this book is packed with timeless strategies that apply to everything.
Everything.
From sealing that dream job to navigating tricky relationships.
It's about mastering the art of strategy.
So it's not about physical combat.
No, not at all.
Okay.
It's about discipline.
And making calculated moves in any situation.
Precisely.
It's about winning,
Winning.
but not always in the way you might think.
Exactly.
Okay,
Are you ready to dive in?
I'm ready.
Oh.
Let's jump into one of Sun Tzu's most iconic principles.
Yes.
Know thyself and know thy enemy.
It's practically a mantra for success, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
Sun Tzu was adamant that understanding your own strengths and weaknesses, as well as those of your opponent, is absolutely crucial for success.
It's not just about knowing, though, is it?
No, it's not enough to just know.
It's about using that knowledge to your advantage.
Exactly.
I love how Sun Tzu puts it.
Tell me.
If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles.
That's some serious confidence.
Yeah, but how do we apply this ancient wisdom to our modern lives?
Right.
I mean, it's not like we're facing off against armies on a battlefield.
Totally not.
Hopefully not.
But think of it this way. Imagine you're a marketing expert, and you're trying to land a job at a cutting-edge tech startup.
It's all about innovation.
You've got to know your strengths,
You
your
don't favor
creative flair.
your killer analytics skills.
Yes, but that's not enough.
Okay,
You've also got to understand their battlefield.
their battlefield. Okay, I like where you're going with this.
I thought you might.
So in this case, their battlefield would be,
Their company culture,
okay,
their values,
their
their audience.
and their competitors.
Precisely.
So it's not just about showcasing your skills.
Right.
It's about demonstrating how you would strategically fit into their world.
Exactly.
So it's less about blowing your own trumpet
Much less.
and more about understanding the music they're trying to create
Right?
and showing how you can play a part.
That's it.
I like that analogy.
I thought you would.
And this principle goes way beyond just job hunting, right?
Absolutely.
Think about any challenge you're facing. Maybe a personal goal you're trying to crush.
Yeah.
A tricky relationship you're navigating.
Right.
Even deciding whether to launch that side hustle you've been dreaming
Oh,
of.
I love that.
Sun Tzu would say, before you charge in, map out your battlefield.
I think you would.
So Sun Tzu, the ancient military strategist,
Yes.
would be a fan of today's business buzzwords.
He might
Things like SWOT analysis.
He might not have called it that,
Right.
but he was absolutely all about dissecting a situation before jumping in.
I see what you mean.
And SWOT analysis.
Yeah.
Looking at your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
Yeah.
That's a tool straight out of the Art of War playbook.
So before launching into any big decision,
Yes.
Sun Tzu would probably tell us to grab a whiteboard and map it all out.
That sounds about right.
List our strengths, where we could stumble,
Right.
what doors are open, and what obstacles we might face.
It's like creating a strategic map of your personal landscape.
So you don't just wander blindly into the battlefield. It helps you identify where to focus your energy
Where you might need reinforcements.
and what potential traps to avoid.
Precisely.
So Sun Tzu, the master strategist,
Yeah.
was all about meticulous planning,
Absolutely.
no impulsive moves.
You got it.
You're absolutely right. Sun Tzu believed that victory is often won through careful planning and foresight.
As much as it is through any kind of brute force.
Those ancient generals weren't just charging into battle hoping for the best.
No, they were much more strategic than that.
They were running simulations
War gaming, different scenarios.
and coming up with backup
Yeah,
plans.
exactly.
So they were basically doing elaborate risk assessment
Way back then.
way back then.
And we see it everywhere today.
Everywhere in business, it's all about project plans, market analysis, contingency planning,
Right.
even on a personal level.
Uh-huh.
It could be as simple as packing a go bag for emergencies or, making sure you have a backup plan if that first date goes horribly
I
wrong.
like that example.
So meticulous planning is key. But let's be real, life rarely goes according to plan.
That's true.
Things change. Unexpected obstacles pop up.
It happens.
And sometimes the best laid plans
Yes.
go totally out the window. What happens then?
That's where Sun Tzu's principle of flexibility over rigidity comes in.
He knew that clinging to a plan when the situation demands a change, of course, is a recipe for disaster.
He did.
He had a brilliant analogy for this, right?
Oh, yes.
He said, water shapes its course according to the ground over which it flows.
That's a powerful image.
It is, and he understood that clinging rigidly to a plan when circumstances change can be your downfall.
Absolutely.
It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Exactly.
Sometimes you've got to be like water flowing around the obstacles instead of trying to force your way through.
I love that.
Imagine a general who's meticulously planned an attack,
Okay.
but then bam, a wild storm rolls in.
Oh, no.
A rigid leader
Right?
might stubbornly stick to the original plan, even if it means leading their troops to defeat.
A costly mistake.
But a truly strategic leader
Yes.
would assess the situation, see the storm as a potential advantage, and maybe even find a way to outmaneuver the enemy using the chaos to their advantage.
That's the kind of adaptability Sun Tzu was talking about.
And this isn't just ancient history, right?
No, not at all.
It's relevant to our lives every single day.
Every single day.
Maybe your career path takes an unexpected detour.
Or a project at work hits a major roadblock.
Sun Tzu would say, don't freak out.
He'd tell us to adjust our sails, find a new course, and ride those waves.
That's the power of flexibility.
It is.
It's not about giving up on your goal.
Yeah.
It's about finding a new path to reach them when the terrain changes.
Absolutely. Welcome back to Wealth of Words.
I'm glad to be back.
We're delving deeper into the art of war and unearthing wisdom that's surprisingly relevant even today.
Yeah, I mean, who knew an ancient military text could be so helpful for,
Yeah.
landing a promotion or figuring out that tricky relationship. So far, we've seen how Sun Tzu's principles of self-awareness, diligent preparation, embracing flexibility, and even strategic deception can be applied to our modern lives,
It's all about adapting these timeless principles to our own unique battles.
whatever those might be.
And speaking of battles,
Yeah.
Sun Tzu was very particular about choosing the where of the fight.
Boy.
He placed a lot of emphasis on understanding the battlefield.
So not just hills and valleys,
No.
the entire landscape of the situation.
Precisely, he used the term terrain
Okay.
to describe the overall context of any situation, and he identified different types of terrain, each with its own strategic advantages and disadvantages.
So when Sun Tzu talked about terrain,
Yes.
he wasn't just referring to physical geography,
Mhm.
it was more metaphorical.
Exactly.
Give us some examples of this metaphorical terrain
Okay.
and how it might play out in our lives.
Well, he talks about what he calls accessible ground.
Yep.
This is terrain that's easy to navigate and beneficial for both sides.
So what would that look like in a modern context?
Think of a collaborative work environment where everyone shares information freely.
Uh,
That's accessible ground. It promotes open communication and progress.
so like a level playing field in business where
Yeah.
everyone has access to the same resources and information.
Exactly.
That sounds pretty ideal. But I'm guessing things aren't always so straightforward.
You're right. Then there's what Sun Tzu calls entangling ground.
Entangling ground.
Okay. This is where things get tricky.
What would be a modern day equivalent of entangling ground?
Think about a bureaucratic nightmare
Uh,
where every decision has to go through layers upon layers of approvals, or a hyper-competitive market where it's nearly impossible to stand out from the crowd.
that sounds a lot less appealing.
It is entangling ground, and it demands a different approach.
So you're saying depending on the terrain, your strategy needs to change.
Precisely.
You can't just bulldoze your way through every situation.
No, you need to adapt.
Sun Tzu also talks about temporizing ground. Terrain, where the best move is to wait, observe, and gather information before making a decision.
So it's like a strategic pause.
Like when you're playing chess and you take a moment to study the board before making your next move.
Exactly. Think about a stock market that's fluctuating wildly.
Okay,
You wouldn't just jump in and make a huge investment, would you?
probably not.
You'd wait, analyze the trends, and then make a calculated move when the time was right.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this terrain metaphor really works.
Good.
It's not always about rushing into action. Sometimes the most strategic move is to hold back and wait for the right opportunity.
You got it. And then there's what Sun Tzu calls narrow passes.
Narrow passes, okay?
This is terrain that restricts movement and creates choke points. It's high-stakes territory, where even a small mistake can have major consequences.
Ooh, narrow passes sound intense. What kind of modern-day situations would you compare to narrow passes?
Imagine a high-stakes negotiation where you have very limited options or a project with a tight deadline and absolutely no room for error.
That does sound intense.
That's a narrow pass. It demands laser focus and careful strategizing.
So understanding the terrain of a situation
Yes,
is all about assessing the risks and opportunities, right?
exactly.
Knowing when to advance,
When to hold back.
when to be aggressive, and when to be cautious.
It's about being aware of the forces at play, both internal and external, and making strategic choices based on the landscape you're navigating.
This terrain concept is incredibly powerful.
It is.
It's like having a framework for understanding the dynamics of any situation.
Yeah.
But even with the best strategy, it's clear that not every battle can be won.
That's true.
So when it comes to knowing when to retreat, when to walk away from a fight, what did Sun Tzu have to say about that?
That's a great question, and it highlights a really important aspect of Sun Tzu's thinking.
Okay.
He believed that victory isn't just about winning battles.
Right.
It's about winning the war.
And sometimes that means knowing when to make a strategic retreat.
Exactly. He was all about calculated risks and preserving your strength for the long game.
So running away isn't always a sign of weakness.
Not at all.
Sometimes it's the smartest move you can make.
Absolutely. Sometimes retreating is the best way to avoid a crushing defeat and preserve your resources for future battles.
So how does retreating put you in a stronger position?
Well, first of all, it gives you time to regroup, assess the situation, and come up with a new plan.
Like pressing the pause button
Yes,
on a project that's not working.
exactly. It gives you a chance to take a breath, identify what's going wrong, and come back with a fresh perspective.
It's like that saying, sometimes you have to take a step back to take 2 steps forward.
I love that.
So retreating isn't about giving up.
No,
It's about giving yourself the space and time to strategize and come back stronger.
precisely. And a strategic retreat can also be a clever way to lure your opponent into a trap.
Okay, how so?
You can create a diversion, make them think you're weak, and then strike when they least expect it.
So retreating can be offensive as well as defensive.
Exactly. And sometimes a retreat is simply about buying time. Maybe you need to wait for reinforcements or for the situation to change in your favor. Sun Tzu was all about using every possible tactic to gain an advantage.
This is all starting to sound a lot like a high-stakes game of chess.
I like that analogy.
You've got to think several moves ahead, anticipate your opponent's actions, and be willing to adjust your strategy on the fly.
Sun Tzu was a master of strategy.
And the art of war
Yes.
is essentially a blueprint for thinking strategically in any situation.
Whether you're facing a literal battle or just trying to navigate the complexities of everyday life.
So if we were to summarize Sun Tzu's key takeaways so far,
Yes.
what would you say are the most important things to remember?
Well, I think it comes down to this. Know yourself, know your opponent, understand the terrain you're operating on, be prepared for anything, be flexible enough to change course when needed, and be decisive in your actions.
And don't be afraid to make a strategic retreat if it means putting yourself in a stronger position for the future.
Exactly. Sun Tzu's wisdom is all about making calculated moves, managing risk, and ultimately achieving victory, whatever that looks like for you. But there's still more to uncover.
Welcome back to Wealth of Words. I'm starting to see the world through a whole new strategic lens.
It's amazing how these ancient principles can shift our perspective, isn't it?
It is. We've
Yeah.
talked about knowing ourselves, our opponents, the terrain of our situations, and even the power of a well-timed retreat.
But there's one aspect of Sun Tzu's thinking that we haven't touched on yet.
And it's a bit more.
Well, psychological.
Okay, now this is where things get really interesting.
You're right. Sun Tzu wasn't just a brilliant strategist. He was also a master of psychological warfare.
Okay.
He understood the power of the mind, how fear, uncertainty, and even carefully crafted illusions could be used to gain a strategic advantage.
What kind of psychological tactics did Sun Tzu use?
Well, one of his classic moves was to make his army appear larger and more intimidating than it actually was. He'd do things like light extra campfires at night or create dust clouds to give the illusion of a massive force approaching it. It was all about playing mind games with the enemy.
So kind of like a bluff in poker, making your opponent think you have a stronger hand than you actually do.
Exactly, and this principle can be applied to all sorts of modern situations.
Right.
Imagine you're in a tough negotiation.
Okay.
If you can project confidence, stay calm under pressure, and subtly hint that you have other options on the table, you're more likely to get the outcome you want.
It's about controlling the narrative.
And shaping perceptions.
It's like that saying, it's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog.
I like that.
Sun Tzu was all about amplifying that fight in the minds of his opponents.
Another tactic he used was to spread rumors and misinformation among his enemies.
Oh,
He knew that confusion and doubt could be just as powerful as any weapon.
that sounds a little sneaky even for an ancient military strategist.
Well, it's certainly a controversial tactic, but it highlights how powerful information or misinformation can be.
I mean, in Sun Tzu's time, it was whispers and rumors.
And today, it's social media and the lightning-fast spread of fake news.
That's a good point. It's more important than ever to be critical thinkers, to question what we see and hear, and to be careful about what information we spread.
Absolutely. Sun Tzu's teachings remind us that knowledge is power, but it's also a responsibility.
So would it be fair to say that Sun Tzu was basically a master manipulator?
I wouldn't use the word manipulator necessarily. It's more accurate to say that he understood the power of psychology and how it could be used to achieve strategic objectives.
So he was playing the game.
And he knew the rules.
But there's definitely a fine line between strategy and manipulation, right?
Absolutely. And it's important to use these tactics ethically and responsibly.
Sun Tzu himself emphasized the importance of righteousness.
Yes, and using warfare as a last resort.
So we've talked about tactics, strategies, psychological warfare, but at the end of the day, what did Sun Tzu believe was the best way to win?
For all his talk of battles and strategies, Sun Tzu believed that the ultimate victory was the one achieved without fighting.
Wow.
He famously said, "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting."
But how do you win without fighting? It sounds almost paradoxical.
It's about being a master strategist, not just a warrior. Sun Tzu believed in the power of diplomacy, building strong alliances, and choosing your battles very, very carefully.
So being proactive.
Anticipating conflicts before they arise and finding creative solutions that benefit everyone involved.
So it's less about conquering.
And more about creating win-win situations.
Finding common ground and working together.
Exactly. It's about using your intelligence, your resources, and your influence to achieve your goals without resorting to unnecessary conflict.
This whole conversation has really been eye-opening. I came into this thinking the art of war was all about, well, war, but it's so much more than that. It's about strategy, psychology, leadership, and even the art of peace.
That's the beauty of Sun Tzu's work. It's a timeless exploration of human nature and the dynamics of power. And even though it was written centuries ago, it's still incredibly relevant to the challenges we face today.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the art of war, what's the one big takeaway you hope our listeners will remember?
I think the most important lesson is that true victory doesn't always come from brute force or outmaneuvering your opponent.
Okay.
It comes from understanding yourself, your goals, and the landscape you're operating in. It's about being adaptable, thinking strategically, and whenever possible, finding ways to achieve your goals without resorting to conflict.
It's about choosing your battles, wisely being prepared for any eventuality, and never underestimating the power of the mind.
Beautifully said. And with that, we've reached the end of our journey through the art of war.
We hope you found it insightful.
Thought-provoking, and maybe even a little bit inspiring.
And remember, the best battles are often the ones we win without ever having to fight.
Thank you for joining us on Wealth of Words.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a thought-provoking book.
Until then, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those strategic minds sharp.
And don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode.